There have been many atrocities committed throughout human history. Many things are still buried as secrets. Maybe we will never know, but historians may have identified a link between the 2013 discovery and a discovery made lately. German archaeologists from Christian Albrecht University in Kiel have been excavating an early Neolithic settlement in what is now Slovakia, near Vrable, near the Austrian and Hungarian borders. They have unearthed about 35 human skeletons while excavating a Neolithic hamlet in Slovakia, located in Central Europe. During the earlier part of the Stone Age, the LBK civilization established a settlement here. Who were the LBK people, you ask? Its name comes from the peculiar spherical form of the vessels that people of the time made from clay. They decorated them with rhythmic ornamentation in the form of spiral ribbons or other geometric shapes. The linear band ceramic culture, or LBK for short, is the earliest known European civilization and is responsible for significant cultural and technological advances over most of Central Europe. Dating to around 5600 and 4900 BC, that is around 7,000 years ago, the LBK culture established itself in a region that was split between an eastern and a western group. The culture mostly lived in the Great Hungarian Plain, the Košice Basin, the East Slavic Plain, Transcarpathian Ukraine, Transdanubia, Slovakia, and Lower Austria. LBK people were the first Neolithic civilization to settle in Central Europe. Those of the ribbon pottery culture that settled here did so in the midst of rich farmland. The first immigrants of the Neolithic period were responsible for the farming of a wide variety of grains, including flat wheat, spelt, barley, millet, peas, lentils, and poppies. In addition to farming crops, the LBK people also raised cattle, sheep, and goats. Some of the foods they gathered were wild apples, almonds, strawberries, and cherries. LBK locals lived in farmhouses. A single community would consist of multiple similar dwellings with room for 100 to 200 individuals over the course of several generations. The most important contribution that the LBK made was the building of colossal wooden homes, which, along with the establishment of farming as a way of life, resulted in the first permanent settlements in the region. Researchers have for a long time thought of the LBK as a relatively consistent civilization that rapidly expanded from the east through migration and simply ousted the indigenous people that had been subsisting off of hunting and gathering. But there is also growing evidence that the situation may have been far more complicated, with a combination of immigration, selective adoption of elements of the agricultural way of life by indigenous peoples, and fusion across groups. On top of that, it seems that Neolithic people may have remained a great deal more mobile than was previously supposed. For instance, they may have moved with their herd following seasonal or yearly rhythms, or during sensitive phases of the life course. In a nutshell, the LBK is far more diverse than was originally thought to be the case. Not only do economic tactics, mobility, and nutrition vary, but so do material culture items such as pottery, home designs, and burial practices. These elements of LBK culture also change through time and across space. At any one point in time, there may have been considerable economic and ethnic diversity within what were once thought to be homogeneous communities. To better understand the social practices of the LBK people, archaeologists dug into the site of their ancient town. As they were wrapping up the dig, they discovered a mass grave containing the bodies of about 35 individuals. Analysts conclude that all of the victims were likely decapitated before their bodies were dumped into a deep ditch. Many of the victims were teenagers. The tomb was constructed sometime in about 5000 BC. Experts think the buried individuals were victims of ritualized murder and sacrifice. Archaeology professor at Christian Albrecht University, Martin Furholt, speculates that it was connected to old magical rituals and beliefs. The expert adds that a wall of defense that was constructed during the same period as the mass burial was also found in the area. It is quite possible that the people who practiced the LBK culture had the belief that the new fortress might be supernaturally strengthened by the sacrifice of human beings. The skeletons in the grave had been beheaded, but the heads were nowhere to be found. The German researcher finds it intriguing that the inhabitants of the ancient ribbon pottery civilization may have been the forebearers of the very first Neolithic invaders in Western Europe. The same people who constructed the megalithic monuments at Stonehenge in England and Karnak in France. After a detailed examination, scientists determined that the bones did not show any signs of further traumas or pathological changes. Everything points to the possibility that these individuals were slain on purpose and disposed of in a mass grave as a part of some kind of ceremony. The fact that the remains were found in a variety of postures suggests that they were randomly tossed into the pit after their death. Also, no skulls were discovered, and it's unclear when or why they were taken out. So, if it wasn't a ritual, why were these people murdered? Most of the people who died were between 18 and 25 years old, and very few were over 30. Archaeologists stress that there were no elderly people, while there was one newborn baby. And it was only the corpses that were not decapitated. Professor Furholt notes that the Neolithic village consisted of around 80 homes, most of which housed families spanning many generations. The village was divided into 3 neighborhoods, and a fortified wall was said to surround only one of them. This might have been a place where the town's social elite lived in relative isolation because they felt threatened by the common people. Perhaps the fort was built to protect the people living there from each other rather than against outsiders of another culture or tribe. And this wasn't the first time historians discovered such a graveyard. Another mass burial from the LBK period was uncovered in 2013 in Halberstadt, Germany. The people buried there likely died around 7,000 years ago. It shows that the early farmers in Central Europe were engaged in some very violent behavior. The 9 corpses were thrown into a grave without any ceremony, their limbs knotted together in a manner that was opposite to the usual orderliness of the early Neolithic burials. 8 were men, the youngest of whom was between 16 and 20 years old, and the 9th was a 21 to 26-year-old woman. Each of their heads showed symptoms of having been hit violently. Scientists studied the isotopes in their bones and teeth, which change based on nutrition, and discovered that the 9 individuals' bones had different isotopes than those present in the remains of other close corpses, presumed to represent the settlement's residents. Although it is unknown who the foreigners were, plausible identifications include prisoners of war and unsuccessful raiders, or precisely where they came from. The savagery that was linked with their murders is obvious. Other Neolithic mass graves have been discovered in Kilianstatten and Thalheim, Germany, and Aspern, Austria, and they contain a variety of wounds that were most likely inflicted on the victims as they attempted to escape their assailants during a surprise slaughter. The exact form of the killing blows that were delivered at the Halberstadt site implies that they were carried out as a part of a mass execution, the likes of which have never been seen before at a Neolithic site. These graves are also unique in their demographic makeup, which is heavily tilted toward young adult males. The lack of young children and females among the deceased suggests that they were part of a failed attacking group rather than a victimized one. Even though these sites are similar to other mass graves, they are different because they suggest that LBK mass executions, which have been talked about but never proven, were an important part of intergroup warfare. The victims, irregularly deposited and severely traumatized, were discarded without ritual, strewn at the bottom of a pit where they would remain ensconced for the next 7,000 years. Another page to the history of mankind.